Deep in these mountains, there's a river older than the bones of the first animals, a forest the last ice age forgot to kill, and a mountain range that was already ancient before the Atlantic Ocean existed. Most people picture Appalachia as coal dust, banjos, and blue haze drive through it once and think they've seen it. They've seen the postcard. And by the time we reach number 1, you'll understand why the ground under this whole region is something geologists still cannot fully explain. Number 18. The blue smoke isn't smoke in the Great Smoky Mountains of Tennessee and North Carolina. Start with the thing the whole range is named for, because we still can't fully predict it. Stand at an overlook at dawn and watch blue haze pool in the valleys like water poured from above. It isn't smoke, and it isn't ordinary fog. Most of it comes from the forest itself. The trees release huge volumes of volatile compounds, terpenes and the like, which react in sunlight and scatter light toward blue. That's the broad outline. What stays open is the fine detail. Exactly how temperature, humidity, plant chemistry, and particle size combine to make one shade over one ridge on one afternoon is something scientists still model rather than close. Drifting pollution tangles the natural signal further. Think about that. The single most photographed feature of America's busiest national park is a haze we named, branded, and sold on postcards, and still can't predict from one day to the next. That's the surface. It gets stranger going down. Number 17, the forest, the Ice Age mist, southern Appalachian coves, western North Carolina, and Tennessee. Drop off the ridgeline into a sheltered cove and the light changes color. The canopy closes, the air goes damp and green. And in the wettest hollows, the forest takes in 80 inches of rain a year. Rainforest numbers. In the American South, people expect ordinary eastern woods. What's growing is a biological holdout. When the last ice age scraped the northern continent down to rock, the glaciers stalled before reaching these coves. Species wiped out everywhere else simply stayed. The result is density that embarrasses whole continents. A single cove can hold more native tree species than all of Europe. Here's the part still being worked out. Biologists haven't finished explaining how so many species packed into these drainages and stayed sorted, each cove running slightly different from the next for reasons that don't reduce to a clean rule. The stereotype says these mountains are worn out and simple. The botany says one of the most complex forests on Earth is sitting here, and no one has fully mapped why. Number 16, the town under the water, Fontana Lake, Swain County, North Carolina. Some Appalachian towns aren't gone. They're just underneath something. Look at the flat green surface of Fontana Lake and understand that roads, home sites, and family cemeteries sit directly below it. In the 1940s, the Tennessee Valley Authority dammed the Little Tennessee to make power for the war effort, and the rising reservoir swallowed the communities along the North Shore. Tourists see clean hydropower and a scenic lake. What the water covers is displacement. Families were bought out and moved, and the road that tied them to their homesteads and graves went under. The government promised a replacement route. It was never finished. Locals still call the stub that dead ends at a tunnel the road to nowhere, and the name is not affectionate. And here's what's never been closed. The full extent of what's still down there, foundations, roadbeds, whole home sites, has never been completely surveyed. The postcard is a recreation lake. The truth is a elid, and no one has fully counted what's underneath it. Number 15, the meadows that refuse trees, Roan Highlands, Tennessee, North Carolina. On top of some of these mountains are open meadows that nobody can fully explain. Walk the Roan Highlands and you break out of the forest into grassy balds, rolling high elevation fields with long views and no trees, sitting well below the line where trees should still grow thick. That's the puzzle. The elevation isn't high enough to keep a forest off on its own. So something else made these openings, and researchers genuinely disagree about what. grazing by vanished Ice Age megafauna, centuries of native land management with fire, old climate swings, historic livestock. Each explanation covers part of the evidence, and none covers all of it. This isn't a solved question dressed up as mystery. It's an open argument that has run for generations, and the balds are slowly filling in with shrubs, which tells you something was keeping them clear that no longer is. A hand we can't identify. A meadow on a mountaintop that shouldn't be there, quietly erasing its own evidence before anyone wins the argument. Overlooks, coves, drowned valleys, balds, those you can almost explain. Almost. But the mountains are about to start hiding things underground and back in deep time, and the deeper we go, the more the answers thin out. Number 14. The caves no one has finished. Tag Karst region, Tennessee, Alabama, and Georgia. Under parts of these mountains, there is more cave passage than anyone has finished mapping. Where Tennessee, Alabama, and Georgia meet, cavers call it Tag. The limestone is riddled with thousands of documented caves, and the count keeps climbing. Walk a hillside on a hot day and feel cold air pouring out of a crack. That's a cave breathing, an opening into a system that may run for miles. Most people know 1 or 2 show caves with handrails and colored lights. Those are a rounding error. Serious cavers still find new passages, new pits, and new connections every year, and the total extent of the karst is genuinely unknown. Entire shafts, hundreds of feet deep, went unrecorded until someone with a rope went looking. So when you ask how big this region really is, part of the honest answer is that nobody has measured the downward half yet. It's one of the few places left in the country where the map still says, quietly, unfinished. Number 13. The fish with no eyes. Southern cave streams, Tennessee and Alabama. Down in that dark, something lives that evolved to never see where it lives. In the underground streams threading the karst, biologists find fish with no eyes and no color, pale, nearly translucent, drifting through water that has never held light. Above ground, we assume the continent's vertebrates are cataloged. Below ground, they aren't. These cave fish, along with blind cave salamanders cut off in isolated pockets, are populations that split apart in total darkness. Some were described only recently. Some are almost certainly still unnamed. Each cave can hold its own genetically isolated line. Evolution running separate experiments a few ridges apart. What biologists are still untangling is how many of these hidden lineages actually exist, because you can only count what you can reach, and most of this water no one has surveyed. An entire branch of life built without the sun, and we don't yet know how many branches there are. Number 12. The salamander capital of Earth, Nantahala and Pisgah National Forests, Western North Carolina. The world capital of an entire kind of animal is a stretch of forest people drive through to reach a brewery. The Southern Appalachians hold the highest salamander diversity anywhere on the planet, the actual global center, not a regional footnote. Roll a wet log in the right cove, and you may find 3 species under it, sometimes more. Outsiders picture bears and deer. The real story is smaller and stranger. Dozens of species of lungless salamanders that breathe entirely through their skin, some living on a single mountain and nowhere else. Their range maps look like shattered glass, each fragment a population that can't cross the dry ridge to the next valley. And here's the open question researchers keep circling. Exactly how so many closely related species split apart and stayed separate across such a compact space isn't fully explained. The most important animals in these mountains would fit in your palm, and the puzzle of how they got here isn't finished. Number 11. The town nobody could bury. Elkmont, Sevier County, Tennessee. There's a ghost town in this wilderness the park spent a century unable to decide about. After loggers stripped the valley around Elkmont, the wealthy of Knoxville turned it into a summer retreat, a club, a hotel, rows of cottages along the river. When the park absorbed the land, families held on through lifetime leases that dragged on for decades. So the buildings aged in place while the Park Service argued with itself. Preserve them or let the forest take them? In the end, both happened. Some cottages were restored, others flattened, and the reasoning behind which got saved and which got a bulldozer was never especially clean. Walk it today, and you pass standing chimneys, sagging porches, and doorways opening onto rhododendron. Here's the overlap that gets people. The famous synchronous fireflies blink through these same ruins every June, and the exact trigger that starts a whole hillside pulsing in unison still isn't fully pinned down. So the crowds come for a light show science can't quite explain and walk straight past the town without a glance. Number 10. Lights on the Ridgeline, Brown Mountain, and the Blue Ridge, Western North Carolina. For generations, people across these mountains have watched lights they can't account for. It's a pattern reported up and down the range, and its most famous case sits east of the Smokies in the Blue Ridge, the Brown Mountain Lights, documented enough that the U.S. Geological Survey investigated them more than once. Pale lights that appear at night along certain ridges, drifting, sometimes splitting, sometimes vanishing when approached. The explanations run from distant headlights refracting through humid air, to swamp gas, to plain misidentification. Some hold up in some cases. None has fully closed the file, partly because people reported the lights before the cars and trains that supposedly caused them. The point isn't that ghosts are real. It's that families who've lived in these hollows their whole lives keep reporting the same thing in the same places, generation after generation, and the confident debunkings keep coming up one detail short. It's the gap between the legend and the logbook that keeps this one open. We're through the visible half now. Haze, meadows, drifting lights, but everything so far still has a shape you can picture. What's left lives under the leaf litter, back in deep time and out past the last road. And this is where even the careful scientists start running low on answers. Number 9. A page no one can read. Judaculla Rock, Jackson County, North Carolina. Just off the park's southern edge, in the Cherokee homeland, lies a slab of stone covered in writing nobody alive can read. This is the heart of Cherokee country, and here sits Judaculla Rock. Its surface carries hundreds of separate carvings, swirls, lines, and figures pecked into soapstone across a span nobody can precisely date. The Cherokee tie it to Tsul Kalu, a giant of the old stories, said to have left his mark crossing the land. Kneel beside it and run your eyes across the surface. It's one of the most densely carved petroglyph stones in the eastern United States, and most people drive right past the turnoff. Here's the part that lingers. Nobody has produced a confident reading of what the carvings mean. Archaeologists have mapped and studied them for years, but the meaning was never recorded anywhere except the stone itself, and the people who carved it left no key. So you stand over a slab knowing every mark was a deliberate choice. Knowing it meant something exact to someone, and knowing the answer went into the ground with the hands that made it. Number 8. The language. Still being spoken, Qualla Boundary, Cherokee, North Carolina. The oldest living thing in these mountains isn't a tree. It's a language, still spoken, with a writing system of its own. On the Qualla Boundary, in western North Carolina, the eastern band of Cherokee holds a culture that predates every park boundary and overlook on this list. Road signs appear in Sequoia's syllabary, an entire writing system one man devised in the early 1800s. One of the few times in recorded history a single person built a working script from scratch. That's a genuine wonder on its own, but the harder loss sits underneath it. So much of what this language carried before the forced removals of the 1830s, the old place names, the stories tied to specific ridges and creeks, The words for things that no longer exist was never written down and is gone. What survives is a living tongue, still taught in immersion schools against long odds. What can't be recovered is how much of the older map it once held. The people who named this land first are still here, still speaking, and still carrying a record that was partly erased before anyone thought to save it. Number 7. The cemeteries you reach by boat. Fontana Lake, North Shore, Swain County, North Carolina. Come back to that drowned valley because the story didn't end when the water rose. When the reservoir covered the North Shore, it didn't cover everything. The family cemeteries sat higher up the slopes and survived, stranded above the new shoreline, with the road to them underwater. So the descendants adapted. To this day, on scheduled days through the warm months, the Park Service ferries families across Fontana Lake by boat, so they can walk up to the graves of their ancestors and tend them. The tradition is rooted in the old Decoration Day custom. Earlier, this lake was loss you looked at from a distance. Up close, it's loss with a boat schedule and a sign-up sheet, carried out by people whose grandparents were moved so the turbines could spin. The promised road along the shore was never finished, so the water is still the only way in. Some grief doesn't fade. It just requires a ferry reservation. We've left the trail entirely. Carved stone, living language, graves reached by water. What's left can't be photographed cleanly. It has to be inferred, dated, or reconstructed. And the closer we get to number 1, the more the honest answer becomes a shrug. Number 6. The fire that won't go out. Underground coal seam fires in Pennsylvania and West Virginia. Parts of Appalachia have been burning underground for decades, and there's no reliable way to put the fires out. Coal seams catch fire below the surface, sometimes from mining, sometimes by accident, and once lit, they can smolder for years, for decades, and, in the worst cases, potentially for centuries, feeding on coal no one can reach. In winter, you can find steam leaking from cracks in the frozen ground. The earth exhaling heat where the seam is cooking somewhere below. The most infamous case emptied a Pennsylvania town when the fire under it couldn't be stopped and the ground grew unstable and toxic. Coal gets talked about here in the past tense, a finished industry. Underground, some of it is still on fire, and mapping the exact reach of an active seam fire is so difficult and dangerous that the honest description is this. Nobody knows precisely how far some of these fires have traveled. The industry left, the burning stayed, and no one can say where it ends. Number 5. The river that runs wrong. New River, West Virginia, and Virginia. One of the oldest rivers on Earth carries a name that means the opposite, and it cuts through the mountains instead of going around them. The New River, running north through Virginia and West Virginia, carved a deep gorge straight across the grain of the Appalachians, which shouldn't happen, because rivers are supposed to follow the low ground the terrain hands them. This one predates the terrain. Geologists call it an antecedent river. It was already flowing on its course when the land began to rise, and it simply kept cutting downward as the rock lifted around it, holding its line for a span estimated in the hundreds of millions of years. Stand on the rim of the gorge, and you're looking at water, winning a very slow argument with a mountain range. Its exact age is still debated, because rock this old and this reworked doesn't give up a clean number. The name is a settler's joke on deep time. The New River may be among the oldest on the planet, older than the mountains it refuses to detour around. Number 4. The storm trapped in stone. Exposed ancient rock surfaces throughout the range. The rock under your boots here holds a record almost too old to picture. The Appalachians are among the oldest mountains on Earth, and much of the stone that makes them was laid down long before the range ever rose, in ancient seas and river systems hundreds of millions of years ago. Look closely at exposed rock in the right places, and you can read that vanished world directly. Ripple marks from a shoreline that dried up before complex life ever crawled onto land. mud cracks, the frozen texture of a seafloor. Geologists use these preserved surfaces to reconstruct environments that existed before there were trees, before there were bones, before almost anything you'd recognize as alive. Run your hand across a ripple set by a tide that went out most of 1 billion years ago. What still gets argued is the full sequence, how these ancient layers were stacked, folded, and shoved into place to build the range we walk today. A slow-motion collision, only partly reconstructed. You're not standing on a mountain. You're standing on the pressed flat memory of a world that ended before the dinosaurs began. Number 3. Life with no name. Great Smoky Mountains, Tennessee and North Carolina. The most visited national park in the country is still, provably, full of species unknown to science. Since the late 1990s, an ongoing effort to inventory every living thing inside the park has kept making the same point. We don't know what's here. The work has documented thousands of species never before recorded in the park, and many hundreds entirely new to science. Insects, fungi, microscopic life, and the count keeps climbing. Every time specialists look harder at the soil, the streams, the fungi, they find more that no one has ever described. Millions of people visit this park every year. They walk its trails, photograph the same overlooks, and the ground beneath them still holds life that has never been named. This is the cleanest proof on the whole list that the region is unfinished. Not mysterious in a vague way, literally incomplete in the scientific record, decades in. We built parking lots on top of an ecosystem we still haven't finished discovering. Number 2, the stumps of giants. Eroded Appalachian summits, the length of the range. These gentle blue ridges were once as tall as the Himalayas, and their smallness is the evidence, not the exception. The popular read is that they're modest mountains, old, worn, tame, nothing next to the jagged western ranges. That reads the height backward. They're low because they're ancient. Hundreds of millions of years ago, the collisions that raised this range built peaks on a Himalayan scale. Everything since has been erosion, water, ice, and time grinding those summits into the rounded forms you see now. What you're standing on isn't a small mountain range. It's the worn-down roots of an enormous one. The base, left after the top few thousand feet, were carried off grain by grain and spread across half a continent. And geologists are still reconstructing the full story of how this rock was stacked, folded, and shoved into place. The stereotype calls them humble hills. They're the stumps of giants, and the missing height is still out there as sediment, scattered across lowlands the range shed over eons. Number 1, older than the ocean, the Appalachian Mountains, the full spine of the range. The single hardest thing to explain about Appalachia is the ground the whole stereotype is built on. Everyone assumes they know these mountains. Almost no one grasps when they formed. The Appalachians are among the oldest mountain ranges on Earth, with roots in places exceeding 1 billion years. Their main building phase predates the very things we use to mark deep time. Older than trees, older than most animal life on land, older than the Atlantic Ocean that now sits beside them. When these mountains rose, that ocean didn't exist yet. The range was part of a single supercontinent, and its rock connects to mountains now stranded in Morocco, in Scotland, in Scandinavia, split apart when the continents tore open and the Atlantic flooded in between. Stand on a ridge here, and you're standing on a range that was already ancient before the ocean was born. Its original form is still being reconstructed from worn stone and scattered fragments across 2 continents. Every place on this list, the blue haze, the drowned town, the eyeless fish, the missing giants, sat on top of this. The most unexplained land in human history isn't hidden in a cave or under a lake. It's the mountains themselves, and we've been calling them tired. Now, before we go any further, let me say one thing, and then I'll leave it be. I've spent longer than I'd care to admit chasing these stories down. The drowned towns, the lights on the ridge, the rock older than the ocean, and I finally gathered the whole of it into one place, a collection called the Appalachian Mysteries Collection. It's every mystery these mountains keep, the ones that never made it onto a postcard, written the way the old folks up here would tell it. If you want it, it's linked below. That's all. The truth is that the Appalachia most people reduce to one fogged-over overlook is, underneath, one of the least finished places on the continent, full of life we haven't named, landscapes we can't explain, and a range older than the ocean that no one has ever fully reconstructed. So tell me in the comments about the trail, the cove, or the stretch of woods near you where something happens that nobody can quite explain, because those are the ones we're hunting next. Subscribe if you want more places the map got wrong, and the next investigation is already waiting for you, right there on screen.